exposing the propaganda and challenging you to use your brain. It's time to tap into the truth.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. It is indeed time to tap into the truth. Welcome to tonight's broadcast. Hope you're having a great day wherever you are. I am, of course, your host, Tim Tapp, coming to you live from historic Roane County, Tennessee. And we've got a few items to get to. First of all, let's take care of some housekeeping up front. I want to make sure that everybody who is aware, would like to be aware, and who is interested in the least, you can find this show in podcast form at Stitcher.com. You can find us at TuneIn.com, and you also can find it at iTunes. You can also find links to the past episodes right here at TapIntoTheTruth.com. Please feel free to check us out anytime, anywhere, so on and so forth. It is the Christmas holidays, and as such, would like everyone to keep in mind that fudge makes a great gift. I've included in the show description a link to Country Fresh Foods and Confections website. The website, of course, is not at its best. It's not optimized at the moment, but there you can find a link to send us an email if you would like to make a purchase of fudge for the holidays, retail purchase. Just let them know. You can call them at 800-545-8782. Or there's also a link that you can send an email to info@countryfreshfood.com. Either one of those will get your information to them, and you can get further information from the site. The site is in the middle of being revamped, however, and is not at its best. So probably be better off just making a phone call and checking this out. Also, while we're on the topic of other websites and other services, I'd like to let everybody know that I am now officially using Magnatune for our bumper music and other musical uses here on the site. One of the things that I like about Magnatune is there's a small monthly fee. Well, actually, it's not even a monthly fee. There's a small fee. You can get a free trial, but you can, through the use of the fee, license the music of the artists that are there. And by utilizing them, you're essentially getting podcast-safe music. It's kind of a big deal for those of us that do the podcasting and do the internet radio. You have to make sure that the artists are getting paid. And ultimately, that's the only way to be legal. It's the only way to have folks be able to carry your tunes. Like a lot of us here at Spreaker are hopeful, if we have not already, made the move to having our shows carried at iHeartRadio. They're not going to take your show if your music isn't legal. So you have to either be able to prove that your music is legal, or just can't have any music. And bumper music is a time-honored tradition in talk radio. Gotta have it. But what I like most about Magnatune is that they have a variety of independent music, the indie music, up-and-comers, folks that are doing it on their own, folks that are trying to make a name for themselves. I kind of like that. I figured that it helps give them some exposure, helps get them a little bit of cash, and works out in their benefit. So if you haven't already checked them out, I would recommend taking a look at them. There are, of course, other options out there as well, but I like the fact that Magnatune is helping folks that aren't on major labels. So there you go. And the Christmas music we'll be playing later has come from Magnatune. I'll be using Magnatune exclusively from now on, and if that changes, I will, of course, let everyone know. Now, as far as today's broadcast is concerned, there's some topics, as you know, have not been here on Spreaker in a while, but I would highly recommend you check out the last couple of broadcasts over at Blog Talk if you're looking for Tap Into the Truth. Have been there. Still having the issues going on with the health of my father, and still a bout or two of my own, and I don't know if it's going around where you're at, but here locally in East Tennessee, there has been a stomach bug that has been going around like crazy. And it's about a 2-day thing, and it seems like everybody in my house has had it except for me. I've been fortunate enough to miss out on it so far. I have my fingers crossed, and I am knocking on wood. Not that I'm superstitious, but hey, why take any unnecessary risk? That's my thought process. Anyway, some of the things that have taken place in the last little bit since I have been on here that is certainly newsworthy is the death of Nelson Mandela. I'd like to talk about that just briefly. Don't really want to spend a whole lot of time on it today. I'll spend more time on that than I will on Obama's little selfie that he's taking so much heat on here. Don't understand why that's a big deal, but we'll get to that in a minute. Then I want to spend the majority of today's broadcast talking about a hot new topic that will not be a rehash or anything that's being repeated from any other broadcasts, and that is today's statements from Speaker of the House, John Boehner, in regards to attacking conservatives that he feels like are attacking him, but they're really just not at all happy about this so-called bipartisan deal that they've reached for the budget that doesn't exist. I'm sorry, when you talk about budget deals right now, dealing with anything to do with our federal government, they haven't had a budget in a while. Okay? There has not been a single budget passed since Obama took office. It just hasn't happened. But we'll get into all that in a bit. Let's go ahead and start with Nelson Mandela and his real legacy. I want to go into this just because, I am a conservative. I think if you've ever heard the show before, you probably know that. But I'm not necessarily a guy that's going to toe the Republican line, because I don't think that the Republican line always really suits conservatism. And quite honestly, it doesn't. But one of the things that you've seen going on in the last little bit, if you paid any attention whatsoever to social media and you have any conservative friends, and if you're on sites like LadyPatriot.com or TeaPartyCommunity.com or even FreedomWorks, a lot of posting about the negative things that Nelson Mandela did in the early days of his life. I mean, for all intents and purposes, he never came out and said that he was a communist. And in fact, he denied that he was a communist. But when you take a look at his policies, there's little question. He believed in collectivism. That is communism. There's no two ways about it. He, in his youth, when he was first trying to fight for the minority rights, the majority rights against the minority government, later to be known as apartheid, he was a violent person. He advocated violence. He was a terrorist. He formally aligned himself with the former Soviet Union. He had close personal ties and a strong friendship with Fidel Castro. There's a lot of reasons why folks in the United States wouldn't have necessarily liked and definitely would not have backed or supported him in his youth. He was a dangerous radical. That's why the people on the left love him so much. That's why he's being sanctified by the American media, the mainstream media, the folks on the left, because he was a radical. And in their minds, he's still one of them. He was the closest thing to Jesus Christ has lived in their lifetime, and they want to deify him, practically. I mean, I literally heard James Carville make the comparison. They said he's like Jesus Christ. He walks the walk. And he did. But what they failed to tell you is that he really wasn't a great man when he was out being a radical, when he was being a terrorist. He was on our terrorist watch list for a while. He was push to be put on it under Reagan. Reagan and Margaret Thatcher both wanted to help Mandela in his quest for equality within South Africa. But there were a couple of problems that constantly stayed in their way of giving any formal assistance, and that is their formal alliance with the Soviet Union and the fact that he did advocate violence. So when Mandela went to prison, he had a lot of time to think, evidently, and at some point he realized that forgiveness and peaceful means could accomplish the same thing. He realized that he could change the world given the opportunity. And, I can't speak to what was in his heart. I can't speak to what was in his mind, but I can speak to the example he set publicly, what he did once he was released from prison, which was a result of negotiations because he still had a great deal of influence outside of prison. What he did once he was released, he hired some of his jailers to be his personal bodyguard. He emphasized forgiveness and a spirit of moving forward together. He could have very easily, just as easily, called for blood on the streets, and people would have listened. People would have followed. He had that level of authority amongst his followers. If he had said, let's go kill a bunch of whiteys, it would have happened. It would have been all-out civil war. He chose a better path. He didn't demand to be made leader of the new government. He negotiated a peaceful inclusion of majority rights within the minority-controlled government. And he ran for the office of president. He didn't demand it. He didn't expect it. He went out and he campaigned and he did the hard work that's required for you to go get the job. And then, once he had the job, what did he do? He didn't immediately go back on all of the deals that he had negotiated and all of the positive things that had been worked towards. He honored his word, he honored the negotiations, and he helped to build a new constitution, one that equally protected both majority and minority rights, and he worked hard to keep it implemented. And even more to the point, and here's what people like Barack Hussein Obama could really take a lesson from. He did not put himself above the authority of the government. While still in office, he went to court to answer charges. I believe it was a civil matter, but the still point is there. He could have just as easily used the office as an excuse not to appear. But he, knowing that all eyes were on him, knowing that it was a matter of establishing a government that would stand for everyone, much like our government here in the States is supposed to, and function that way for nearly 150 years of the 200 plus years of its existence, where no person, regardless of office, station, race, creed, color, religion, whatever, every person was held accountable by the same standards. And then when his term of office was over, he was done. He laid it down, and he went into retired life. He still remained a public figure. He still made comments here and there. South Africa has actually taken a turn more towards a dictatorial slant, strong leftist leanings, what you would expect from a government party that was still predominantly communist in nature. And shortly before his death, he actually had started speaking out about it again. He was a man who could have called for violence. He could have done bad things. one man did change the world, especially in that part of the world. And what he did was a great thing. He was a great man. But he also was a communist. He was a terrorist. He did bad things. I'm willing to give him credit for having changed. I still would have preferred that his politics had moved a little more center rather than to the left where he started from. But he also, despite all that, is not a deity. He is not a god. And there is absolutely, positively no reasonable rationale for equating Nelson Mandela with Jesus Christ or any other religious figure. He was a great man that did great things, but he was also a very bad man who did bad things. He changed. He became a better person. And he set a good example. I'll give him credit for that. I'm not like a lot of these folks that just want to crucify him for the bad things, and I'm definitely not like these folks that want to praise him as if he could walk on water, because neither gives you the full picture. And it's important to put Mandela's legacy, to understand it, it's important to put his life in perspective and see the full view. Hopefully, his legacy will be one showing that even for the people that are on the left side of the political spectrum, there are folks that understand that the rule of law is more important for the preservation of people's individual rights than the rule of men. And that is always ultimately what you get, the rule of men, when you believe in a collectivist ideology. When collectivism is pushed by your government, when that's what's embraced, individual rights always get mushed, for the lack of a better term. Now, let's go ahead and shift gears. That's my say on Mandela. I hope I didn't piss anybody off too awful bad, but I know it's a harsh line where liberals won't be happy about part of what I said, and a lot of conservatives won't be happy about a lot of what I've said. So if I've equally pissed everybody off a little bit, then I think I've done my job there. But let's move on. The Obama selfie thing, please. Seriously, why are we even talking about this? Why is this a big deal? Honestly, at this point, is it presidential? No. It's definitely not. But tell me 5 things that Barack Hussein Obama has done since he's been in office that is particularly presidential, or at least to the standard of United States presidential. In all honesty, when you looked at the collection of thugs and communists and thieves and terrorists that were at this memorial for Nelson Mandela, I don't know that there is a U.S. president while sitting in office that we've had before that would have attended. They would have found some other way to pay their respects. They wouldn't have been seen with the same group of folks. A lot of people are upset over the handshake with Raul Castro. A lot of Cuban Americans, and I hate hyphenated Americans, but in order to make sure everyone knows what the grouping is, you're either an American or you're not. It's that simple. The hyphenated thing is something I don't particularly care for. But if that's how you want to be identified by, I'll go along with it for the purposes of respecting your wishes. I don't like it. I wish you would prefer to just be called an American of Cuban descent. And not to mention the fact that just honest to goodness Cubans that were still refugees, Cubans that are still trying to make their way here. A lot of those folks are pretty upset about the handshake. I can't say I'm a particularly big fan of it either. I know that you have to be reasonably polite in diplomatic functions, and you don't want to cause an international event, but it seems to me that Barack has had a way of seemingly over-friendly with folks that are declared enemies of the United States, and yet seems to refuse general common courtesies to folks that are allies of the United States. Maybe he feels like, well, we don't have to be nice to these people if they're our friends. And, typical liberal style, the tree-hugging, we can hug everything out kind of ideology. Maybe he honestly buys into, if we're reaching out and being nicer to the folks that think that they should hate us, maybe we can be nice enough to them that they'll change their mind. So maybe some of that was in play. And if that's the case, then while it's extremely naive and should expect to get some pushback, we'll say, from the opposition when you do it, again, in the grand scheme of things, how bad does the handshake really hurt? What does it change? Has it done anything? It just seems like something silly to try and pick on to me. And I don't mean to minimize the genuine anger by the American community that are of Cuban descent. Those folks have legitimate reason to be angry because they're here because they had to leave their home. A beautiful home, by the way. Cuba is a beautiful island. I haven't been in person, but I've seen a lot of video footage and television, and I have a couple of friends that actually, their parents were refugees from Cuba, and they were old enough that they remember what it was like. Just great stories. Obviously a beautiful island, beautiful place to be. And Fidel took everything from people that were business owners, and it's terrible. So I don't mean to minimize any of the anger that those groups have, but for the rest of us, is this really the best we can do? And then we get back to the selfie. First of all, it's extremely juvenile, okay? And really, it looks like a couple of guys just being guys with the one chick. And if you haven't seen it, it's all over the internet. You can find it on just about every site that purports to be a news site of any kind. I don't have it up on Tap Into the Truth because I think it's just too silly to really go into. But, I mean, you have the Dutch Prime Minister. She's a bit of a hottie. And evidently she thought it'd be really cool if she and the Prime Minister of Britain and Barack all got a picture together. And you can see Michelle off to the side, and she's obviously about to slap the back of somebody's head. It looked like she's just a sour-looking lady in that particular picture. I haven't seen her not look sour very often, quite honestly. I don't think she's a people person. I could be wrong. I'm just saying from all the pictures that I've seen, Michelle Obama does not seem like she's particularly happy very often about anything. If that's inaccurate, then I offer an apology. But based on all the pictures I've seen, I don't see much. But, as far as Americans are concerned, is it a little embarrassing for us to see that this is the guy that we put in charge? Is that why this is a big deal? Again, it's just not very presidential. And I think that's part of the issue that a lot of folks have, is that the man's never really acted that presidential. He hasn't. I don't care how big of a supporter of him you may be. Oh, he's the anointed one. He is the great one. He is our savior. Whatever. He still never acted presidential. The most presidential he's ever acted is when he's giving prepared statements and is able to read them from the teleprompter. When he doesn't have to go off script, he's fine. And he can be very eloquent. But even then, most of what he says isn't particularly presidential. And let's not kid ourselves. The selfie is a symptom of this, but the man has demonstrated the fact constantly that he is extremely narcissistic, even for a politician. And let's understand, okay, let's make no bones about it. If you're in politics for very long, you have to be a little narcissistic, because you have to honestly believe you can do a better job than whoever's going to run against you. And you have to be willing to go around and tell everybody why you think that and convince them that the same thing's true. So you have to be a little narcissistic. But this man has proven himself to be extremely narcissistic. Everything he did about the memorial, he made more about him. If you heard his speech, it didn't sound like he was talking about Nelson Mandela. It sounded like he was talking about himself. And I think he was. When he first took to Twitter to try to give any type of reference to memorializing Nelson Mandela, what does he do? He tweets out a picture of him in Mandela's prison cell. He tweets out the story of how it was Nelson Mandela that really moved him into political life. That's not talking about Mandela. It's talking about him. Everything is always about him. Seriously, at some point, is somebody going to stand up and say, hey, dude, really? Not everything's about you. Sure, if that was something that happened with one of his staff, he'd probably get fired. But at any rate, I get the fact that it's not presidential. But again, if this is the best we can do, let him go off. Let him be a buffoon. Let him quietly disappear. Because, ultimately, the bigger deal we make about it, the worse it's going to be. If we'll just let this blow by, then folks will forget about it and we'll be done with it. When it comes to the long list of things that Obama has done, at least this one is not going to hurt anybody. Okay? So, let's get back to looking at the real issues. That's all I've got to say about that. And in the meanwhile, let's take a quick break. And once that break's over, we'll talk about John Boehner and what he said today that has a lot of conservatives up in arms, and myself included. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Tap into the truth. Check us out at tapintothetruth.com. for our latest blog posts and for links to all of our past broadcasts. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and to follow us on Twitter. That's Tap Into the Truth, right here on Spreaker Radio.
Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. We are back. Thanks for staying with us. We are talking about Mandela's legacy, Obama's selfie, and now we are going to talk about John Boehner's statements today in regards to this so-called bipartisan deal that they've reached. We'll get into that. But before we do, would like to take this opportunity to thank everybody who has followed the show right now. I'd like to invite everyone else, if you're listening to the show, please come find us on Spreaker if you're catching it somewhere else, and follow the show. I am into the 90s now with followers here, so we're getting really close to being able to try and take the show to iHeart. Would love to be able to do that, and would at that point in time have all the rationale and support that I would need to go ahead and force issue and start setting a specific time aside for the show and hitting it. Would love to do it 3 times a week, quite honestly, and I think we're at a point where we'll be able to do that soon. But please follow us if you will. I certainly would appreciate it. While we're also on the topic, please go check out tapintothetruth.com. While you're there, check out our blog post, check out the links to our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter. That's how the word gets around, you know. Also, check us out. If you catch us on Stitcher.com, you can find both versions of Tap Into the Truth, both this version and the Blog Talk version there, but you'll have to do your search, and they will come up separately there. But if you look at TuneIn.com, both shows show up on the same feed, so works out real well. That, of course, would change if we went to iHeart, because this then becomes an exclusive RSS feed to them. And I'm okay with that. You can hear us live, or you could check us out at iHeart. The other versions of the show, of course, are still active. Speaking about the other version of the show, this upcoming week, coming this Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern, 2 o'clock Central, Danny Page will be back on with me, and he'll be talking with us for an hour, uninterrupted. He has been on the show before, and he, of course, if you don't know, is one of the folks running for the Republican nomination, one of the guys trying to primary Lamar Alexander. He's been on the show before. We went the basics. We got to know Danny. He wants to come on this week and talk about some of the platforms, some of the issues, get more into specifics, and, of course, during this second half of that hour, we will open up the phone lines, and you'll have a chance to call if you so choose. So let me welcome you to do that while we are also at it. You've heard me talk about patriotspace.com before. If you are looking for a social media website where you can be conservative and not have to worry about a lot of liberals giving you a hard time, or worry about being defriended because you occasionally put political stuff up, there are a couple of great places to go. Patriotspace.com is one of them, and they are in the midst of a membership drive, but things have changed. My friends at Lady Patriots have taken over the site. So now they are no longer patriotspace.com, they are ladypatriotspace.com. You don't have to be a lady to be there. They do welcome gentlemen patriots as well. And unlike my friends over at teapartycommunity.com, they're a little more open towards various political views. They just want you to be patriotic and love the country. That's the only requirement you have to be a member at ladypatriotspace.com. I do have a link in the show description to the site. I highly recommend you check them out. In the meanwhile, time is getting short, and I've really got to get to this item because this is biggie and it's relevant. House Speaker John Boehner today took a hard swing at various conservative groups that are opposing the newly announced bipartisan budget deal. In fact, during a question from a reporter, he actually made the statement, you mean the groups that came out and opposed it before they ever saw it? Now, before the deal was announced back on Tuesday, Heritage Action and Americans for Prosperity, both two very good organizations, they both stated their opposition to it on various reasons. And it had to do with leaked information, which, the other thing about that is maybe it's accurate, maybe it isn't. Looks like most of it is so far. But following the announcement, Club for Growth said that it would oppose the deal and include it on its congressional scorecard. Boehner, quote, they're using our members and they're using the American people for their own goals. This is ridiculous. Boehner also got a little louder and said, listen, if you're for more deficit reduction, you're for this agreement. Really? I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now, the deal was reached by House Budget Chair Paul Ryan and Senate Budget Chair Patty Murray. It modestly raises spending levels from the $967 billion mark to $1.014 trillion by 2015. Now that's really reducing deficit spending, isn't it? Now, this counteracts approximately one-third of the sequestration cuts, and it also reduces the deficit by $20 to $23 billion by hiking airline fees and requiring federal workers and military personnel to kick in more for their pensions. Now, those two particular items may not be so bad if the military personnel were being paid better and the federal workers weren't going to go whining to their union folks, and that'll probably be undone. And the airline fees, guess what? That's just going to make it harder for us to travel, and isn't airline travel already so pleasant? Boehner's tone towards the conservative groups in question was unusually aggressive. A further signal that he wants to pass the House Republican caucus, where the group holds sway among other members. Now, Levi Russell, Director of Public Affairs for Americans for Prosperity, responded to Boehner's comments, saying that the AFP stood with House Republicans earlier this spring when they passed modest spending limits set by the sequester. That bipartisan agreement was signed by President Obama and set spending levels at $967 billion. It's disappointing to see leadership give up even those modest gains with nothing to show for it. Americans are deeply concerned about the direction of the country, and over the next few days, lawmakers will have to explain to their constituents, many of whom are members, what they've achieved by increasing spending, increasing taxes, and offering up another round of promises waiting to be broken. That will be a really tough sell back home. All that said by Dan Holler, Communication Directors for Heritage Action. Now, Club for Growth released a statement as well. said that, quote, "We stand with Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, Tom Corbin, Rand Paul, members of the Republican Study Committee, and every other fiscal conservative who opposes the Ryan Murray deal." Now, the group's president, Chris Cola, said that, and also said, quote, "After carefully reviewing the budget deal, on which we never commented until it was complete, we determined that it would increase the size of government. We support pro-growth proposals when they are considered by Congress. In our evaluation, this isn't one of those." Now, for those that understand baseline budgeting, this basically comes back to that concept. They think they have to spend all this money, and they think the budget needs to grow each and every year. They're undoing the sequestration, supposedly by a third. But in the grand scheme of things, the part that upsets me more than anything here is John Boehner coming out and saying that if you're for more deficit reductions, you're for this agreement. When he says that these other groups are using our members and they're using the American people for their own goals, and this is ridiculous. Mr. Boehner, Representative Boehner, please understand, the goal, the purpose that these people are putting forth is the goal of protecting the United States from further debt, from protecting the American citizens from a uncontrollable, unsustainable deficit spending federal debt that is crushing future generations. Let's stop talking about deficit reduction and let's start talking about balanced budgets. What is wrong with the idea, Representative Boehner, Mr. Speaker? What is wrong with the idea of the American people expecting you to do the job of actually controlling the purse strings? That is the job of the House, Mr. Speaker. I know you know that. This bipartisan agreement, this is the best we can get past the democratically controlled Senate that the president will sign. We don't want another government shutdown. We're afraid of public reaction. I've got news for you. The folks who stood up and were willing to shut down the government before, you did win a political battle. You won. The polls in and around the Beltway mean nothing. It's flyover country that you need to be concerned about. And if you really are going to put trying to win your next election ahead of the job of running the country and doing what's best for the country, then you don't deserve to hold that office anyway. Mr. John Boehner, you proved today by your reaction to these conservative groups that want to see spending brought under control, that not only do you not deserve to be Speaker of the House, but I question whether or not you deserve to be in the House of Representatives at all, and certainly do not deserve to be considered in leadership in the political party that's supposed to be about conservative ideology. Ladies and gentlemen, we are under a minute, and it's funny how the time flies. Let me go ahead and take this opportunity to remind you, do not take my word for it. Definitely don't take their word for it. Take your time, do your own research, use your brain, and always be prepared to work just a little bit harder if you want to really tap into the truth. That's it tonight. Thanks, everybody. And again, hope to see you real soon, right back here. Gonna take you out with some Christmas music tonight. Have a great night, everybody.